It's always good to have the faithful gather once again. My name is John Hamming. I'm with the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. I wanted to give you a brief overview of today. We are going to start off with a discussion about the Kentucky process that has gone in terms of their implementing the Common Core state standards. Now, we're calling it a roadmap in their instance because they've actually done a fair amount of the work. And they're going to share in some more detail with you kind of the nitty-gritty considerations that need to go into doing this work. We hope that this will end up being a pretty interactive session with you. We want to really thank the state of Kentucky for this opportunity to work with them. This has just been a terrific joint conference for us. We've certainly learned a lot from the people in Kentucky. We've had very vibrant conversations yesterday going forward, and we're looking to continue that. Following this morning's session, we are going to break out into state team meetings. And what we're going to be asking you to do in those state team meetings is to list the major elements of things that you need to be doing to put together a plan for implementing the Common Core. We're not asking you to do timelines or anything like that, but just simply to list the major tasks. There will be a staff person in each one of your breakout sessions, and we're going to be harvesting what you do, and we're going to be putting together kind of a global list of the kinds of things that need to be addressed, and we'll be sharing that with you and asking you to help us flesh that out as we go forward. So that's the basic plan today. We will then come back at the end of the morning, and Jolene Kester is going to share with you the discussions that went on last night at the College Readiness Partnership Steering Committee meeting. We had some very good discussions, and we think that we have some interesting suggestions going forward for you. So that's where we are going this morning, and I'm going to turn this over to the folks from Kentucky and ask John to come up and begin. Thank you. No, you do not.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. I promise this is the last session where you're going to hear Kentucky talk to you about all the wonderful things we're doing. People have got to be getting tired of that. But my name is John DeAtley. I'm at the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education. My colleague, Felicia Cummings-Smith, is Associate Commissioner at the Kentucky Department of Education. And Kim Walters-Parker is what's your title? Director?
Director of the Division of Educator Preparation.
Doesn't that sound official? At the Education Professional Standards Board Teacher Certification Agency. This is not my favorite format for this meeting. It seems a little odd for us to be on a podium when there's 50 people in the room, but we're webcasting, I guess, so this sort of by necessity. We wanted to talk to you this morning some about, our original plan was to talk some about the context, but if you've been here the last couple of days, you've heard a lot of context, and that's the history behind Senate Bill 1. If you were here Monday night, you got an incredible history lesson from the players themselves in that game, and it was an impetus for a great deal of our work, although a lot of it was already underway. So what we want to talk about today are some details of some of the elements of the activities we put in. We don't have time to go through all of it, and not all of it would necessarily be appropriate for this venue anyway. But we mostly want to talk about some of the bumps in the road. And because if you were from another planet and you sit down, you would think that the work going on in Kentucky is perfect. Well, this is the model. If we can replicate this model, this will go smoothly in our state. That's not necessarily so. There are cultural issues and personality issues that may make some things possible in your state that aren't in ours, and perhaps vice versa. But I want to reiterate a point to begin with, and then we're going to sort of pass this around a little bit. But please, if you have a question, you want to talk about this is meant to be a conversation. This is perhaps not the best conversational arrangement, but that's the goal.
I want to reiterate a point that Bob King made on Monday night about leadership being important. We had leadership from the General Assembly, and we had leadership from the presidents of our agencies. And that helped those of us who were already interested in that kind of collaboration with a bully pulpit, if you will. It gave us a platform to stand on to do the work. But I don't know how many of you are in Bob King and Terry Holliday-like positions, and how many of you are in John, Felicia, and Kim-like positions where you're sort of the chief lieutenants for some of the work. But if I were to give you one piece of advice about leadership, is that the leaders need very strong lieutenants. You need people who will put their head down and push on the right issues repeatedly when resistance is met. And I can guarantee you resistance will be met. Some of the changes are very difficult for people. Human beings are not, for the most part, inclined to change easily. I'm just going to give you one little example before we start talking about some of the other issues. And many of you know Sue Kane in the audience. She and I are, she's good cop, I'm bad cop in Kentucky.
I thought it was Beauty and the Beast.
Well, she is definitely the good one. We began working on a process actually before Senate Bill 1 to align our college readiness cut scores on the ACT. That was a process that involved a lot of faculty, both K-12 and post-secondary, giving us feedback on those numbers, and we did some of our own research. After we did that, we started working on a series of, well, what will be the next chances for students? Compass, which is an ACT product for placement. We have a test, which some of you may have heard about this week, called the Coyote, which is a free online test. Was only in mathematics, now reading and writing are being added, that students could take to demonstrate readiness. Well, one of the things we had to do in that process was to make sure that all of our institutions were accepting the same cut scores, so that students in the K-12 schools, when they finished a transitional course or when they took the exam for whatever reason, could expect that whatever institution they were admitted to, community college, four-year institution, would accept that score if they passed, that they didn't have to deal with 24 different sets of cut scores. I think that sounds pretty logical, doesn't it? That sounds fairly straightforward. When we started that process, each institution had their own placement test. Each math department had their own placement test, didn't they, Sue? And they liked their placement tests. Their placement tests were much, much better than any placement test we were going to suggest. And that was a process of several months convincing people that the tests we were proposing that everyone used were valid and reliable and had predictive validity. And we had to involve our provosts. Most of your states, the higher ed, I would imagine your chancellors or provosts have a regular meeting. Our provosts tend to meet whenever our Council of Higher Ed meets, but it's probably 6 or 8 times a year on average. And they're a very strong group, and we got to the point where we had to say, this is what we want to do and why, and your faculties aren't playing along. Now, I should preface that by saying probably 75%, 80% of the faculties were playing along. This is fine. But you had some very strong players who didn't want to change what they were doing. So when we reached the limit of where we could push, we had to get some people who were actually other people's bosses involved and create a series of rationales. I mean, you have to have evidence and you have to be rational about it. But once you do that, if you get the right people involved, you can start to push and make change. That's one small example of this kind of work. It's not like we said we're going to set common cut scores and we wrote it down and everybody said woohoo, and we signed the document and moved on. It wasn't like that, and it's not going to be like that in your state when you try to implement those kind of changes. So we're going to talk about some examples like that, because I think John and Julie and others, that's what you wanted from this session, is that kind of interaction, process details about how some of this might work. So, Felicia?
I just want to pick up on, again, good morning, Felicia Cummings-Smith, Associate Commissioner at the Department of Education. I want to pick up on quite a bit of what John has said and just reiterate that this has not been easy work. And we have really relied on each other, as well as many other people that are behind us and lifting us up in order to make the vision of our heads of the agency a reality in our state. You have heard quite a bit about the work that the department has been engaged in with higher ed around implementation of Common Core. And you probably, the first day, heard from Karen Kidwell, who is my director in the Project Standards Division, who is an innovative thinker. And while you heard John say that the lieutenants are important for this work, I would say that the team of individuals around the lieutenants are also critical players, because you have to allow people to be critical thinkers, to be innovators, and to give them the freedom and flexibility to think of a plan, and then I remove the barriers. I find the funding. I agree with or challenge the thinking, and she and I have worked hand in hand with our implementation efforts with many other people who are surrounding that work. But the folks that are around your lieutenants and who are part of the team, especially in the state agency, have to understand the vision and where we're going as well. And I think that's a part of the work that I've been engaged in making sure that all of the individuals in which I provide oversight in an office of over 150 people and growing.
There's 3 in my shop.
Understand the vision and where we're headed, and that they are courageous leaders and that they lead from wherever they are in the agency. And I think that has been a mind shift and much of our work in calling on individuals in the agency to think in new and different ways in order to face the challenging times that we continue to have ahead of us with budgetary constraints and the resistance that you heard John speak to earlier. So this work requires a high level of commitment, and it requires individuals who are courageous. And it also requires us to really think about the capacity that we have